today we are going to start looking at legal and ethical issues for therapeutic workers. The first group of legal issues we're going to talk about are credentialing. Okay, way back when we learned credentials as a vocab word. So we're not going to spend too much time talking about what credentials are, but there's different types of credentials that we're going to look at a little bit more closely. If you remember, credentials are those things that allow us to do certain jobs based on our training and our expertise. Okay, so when we're looking at different credentials, license is the first one, or licensure, which is simply required by law for some professionals to protect public health, safety, and welfare. Okay, some healthcare professionals have to have a license, and others do not. An athletic trainer is an example of someone that does have to have a license. I have to have a certification. I have to be nationally certified. And then in the state of Indiana, I also have to have a license. Okay. I was just looking at a chart in the last couple of days in a book that we're going to be using for my athletic training class next year. And it showed athletic training professionals and what states require licensing, and there were only 2 states. I was surprised that there were still 2 states that didn't require a license. Some other examples of healthcare professionals that have to have a license include medical doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and therapists. Okay, each of these licenses are managed and controlled by each state's Department of Health. Okay, so for me to work in Indiana, I have to have a license filed with the state of Indiana, the health department in Indiana. Okay, these licenses are only valid for a certain amount of time. The athletic training license is about a 2-year license. I think that's a pretty standard. Some are maybe 3, but for the most part, they're about a 2-year license. And then after that, you have to complete CEUs or go through a renewal process. In the case of athletic trainers, we have to complete CEUs. So we have to have 50 CEUs completed every 2 years, and then we have to log all those CEUs and prove that we have completed those units to get our license renewed, and usually pay a little fee. I think it's like $50 or $100 every couple of years to get our license renewed. Okay, looking at CEUs. I said the word CEUs several times, but I didn't tell you what it was. So CEUs stand for Continuing Education Units. Okay, simply they're courses that we take to keep us up to date on knowledge and skills within our field. Okay, so I wouldn't have a CEU in open heart surgery. Okay, that's not something that I'm credentialed. It's not within my scope of practice. So those are things that I don't do. But I might take some classes on new rehabilitation in concussions. Okay, concussions are very much a part of my scope of practice, and so I need to be up on the latest research. I need to know that now, instead of having total rest, we want students to do a little bit of physical activity following a concussion. Okay, we don't want to throw them back into a football game, but we want them to do a little bit of activity. We don't want them laying on the couch in a total vegetative state until they're better, because they're not going to get better as quickly. Okay, but that's something that I would take CEUs on. Okay, there are state and federal regulations, of course, which those are laws used to regulate or control the training and practice of healthcare practices. So that way we can provide safety to the public. Okay, this has to do with licensing, it has to do with HIPAA. There's just lots of different laws in that, saying that you can't just go home one day and say, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. Oh, I'm going to be a physical therapist. There's laws and practices that you have to follow through your training to be able to do that, or you wouldn't be able to keep the public safe with your claiming to be a doctor. Certification. Earlier, I said that I was sort of nationally certified. Okay, so certification is another form of credentialing. We've talked about this earlier in the year. Okay, but it's a voluntary credential created by a professional association. Okay, these are not mandatory by law. So I am a certified athletic trainer and a licensed athletic trainer. The license part is required by law. I cannot practice in the state of Indiana without um, being licensed. Okay, certification. The the National Athletic Trainers Association has created a credential of being certified, nationally certified, and that is required, okay, for me to practice. So it's not necessarily just mandated by my law, but my professional association said this is something that we have to do. So I have to become nationally certified, and then I can sit for my licensing. Okay. So the state of Indiana doesn't allow me to just go get an athletic trainer's license. I have to be certified before I can even apply for that license. Registry. An example of this would be like a registered nurse. Okay. So a registry is a list that employers use to confirm that a worker's credentials are current. You're going to get a little practice with this in a little activity in the next couple of days, looking at registry and looking to see whose credentials are current. You're going to look and see if my credentials are current. See that if I could be practicing currently as an athletic trainer or not. The next grouping we're going to talk about is has to do with scope of practice. Okay, and the first term is liable. Okay, liable simply means legally responsible. Okay, so there's two ways where liable fits in to healthcare. Workers can be held liable for not performing tasks within their scope of practice. Okay, an example of this would be um, if someone went down with a heart attack and I just kind of stood there and said, "Oh goodness, they probably need CPR, but I'm not comfortable with it, or I don't want to do it, or I don't know how, or I can't remember." Um, I could be held liable. Okay, so performing CPR is definitely within my scope of practice, and so that means with if a situation arises where someone needs CPR and I'm working, I have to do CPR. Okay, if I don't, that family could find me liable. The other side, on the flip side, is that workers can also be held liable for performing tasks outside of the scope of practice. So, Johnny falls down, Johnny breaks his leg. I can easily tell that his leg is broken, and I decide to do surgery right there. Cut the leg open, try to splint it, use some screws. I don't know. I don't know why I would have screws laying around the athletic training room, but let's say I did. And I tried to perform surgery on. That is outside of my scope of practice. I definitely can be held liable for that. Okay. I would definitely be held legally responsible for trying to perform that surgery. Okay. The next group is malpractice. Okay, malpractice, if you take malpractice and you split it up, we have mal, which means bad, and then we have practice, which means practice. So malpractice is literally bad practice. Healthcare workers, as we talked about a couple of days ago, have a scope of practice and those tasks that he or she is legally allowed to perform. Okay, surgery does not fit into my scope of practice. Taping ankles, CPR, doing injury evaluation, doing ankle rehab, those are all within my scope of practice. Okay, These healthcare workers are expected to provide a certain standard of care. If we do not perform to that standard of care and the patient is harmed, we can be found guilty of malpractice. Okay. So, in our example, um, if someone falls down and breaks their leg, and I just tell them to get up and go to the emergency room, I could be found guilty of malpractice. Okay. I should check and see whether they need that splinting. In most cases, I would need to splint the broken bone and either give them crutches, carry them myself, load them into the gator, or load them into an ambulance to take them to the hospital to get that x-ray. Okay. If you do something below that standard of care and they're harmed, that's malpractice. So in our example, if I told them, "Oh, yeah, you broke your leg, you're gonna need an X-ray. Go ahead and head to the hospital." And that person just gets up and walks off, and then their leg gets even in a worse position, and that ends up resulting in surgery. They could sue me for malpractice. Okay. Malpractice is often considered or is a result of negligence. Okay. So negligence, we've heard negligence probably a little bit more often than some of the other terms, but negligence is failure to do something um, a person with training would have known to do. So if my husband, who hasn't had any, if he comes across someone that has a badly broken leg and he doesn't treat it right and their leg gets displaced badly, he can't necessarily be found negligent because he hasn't had the training to care for that. Okay. If I come across someone who has a badly broken leg and I tell them to get up and walk on it, I've been trained to handle that. So I can definitely be found negligent. We're going to stop there for today. Next time, we will get into mistreatment of patients.